Flutter has many screens, and responsive design allows it to adapt to all the different screen sizes. Now, Android phones, of course, have many different sizes and layouts and everything, but even when it comes to iOS devices, there's a lot of different sizes and layouts that you can have. For example, there's a 14 Pro Max, but they also have a 14 Pro, which is smaller, and then a 14, which is even more different. And there's also an iPad, then there's macOS applications, which can stretch in all sorts of directions. You can also develop for the web, so that can have different sizes. Basically, responsive design is very important when you're developing with Flutter. Thankfully, Flutter has built-in tools to help us with this. Now, this is going to be the last section about UI, and if you want a deeper dive on UI and responsive design in general, there's a course in Zero to Mastery linked below for that. There are two approaches to ensure that your code is responsive, and we're going to be covering both of those. First, let me bring this window over here because we're going to be using the macOS so we can stretch and make it look different sizes to make sure we're actually being responsive. I did a little setup before this video because this code that I wrote out isn't really important to the lesson, and it's just a row and some columns. So this one is a row with 2 columns, and I called this big display. And I also created a small display, which is a column with 2 rows instead. And we can show you what that looks like. Small display, if we save it, you'll see it's literally the opposite. What we're going to be doing here is when it's narrow, it makes sense to have rows so you can see things properly like this. But when your screen gets bigger, when this screen gets bigger and wider, it makes sense to have columns. And a lot of applications and websites are set up to respond to things like this. So the main thing you need to know in order to build a responsive app is how big your screen is, the width and the height specifically. And you can get those dimensions directly from Flutter. So to get the width, you do media query .of context, which is something we've seen a lot. Just take the media query of this current context. A media query is basically information about your application, like the screen size. You can do the size and then the width of this specific screen. Now we can do the same thing and retrieve the height. We're not actually going to be using the height, but I just want to show you that you can do the same thing here. So we have the width and the height of our screen. Let's actually print it out so you could see it. Yeah, let's just print the width for now. We can bring this up. You'll see right now the width is 1037. If we drag it, see how the numbers changed to 933 and so on. So that's how you get the width of the screen size. And if we go down here, we can just display the different screen depending on the width. So if our width is greater than, let's say, 500 pixels, we want to display the big display. If it's smaller than 500 pixels, we want to display the small display. Now if we save it, this must be more than 500. When we get to 500, it switches. And just like that, you have a responsive design for your Flutter application. You might have noticed this button that doesn't do anything yet because there's another way to do it. We're actually just going to copy all of this widget. And we're going to create another screen called the layout page, maybe. Paste that in. You need to import material. I'm going to do Command D to select all the My Homepage parts, and we're going to do layout page. And let me change the title at the top so that you know that this is indeed the layout page. And this one, we don't need a button at the top. And in the main screen, let's be able to click into it so we could actually see what that screen's all about. Gonna do navigator.of context. Push a material page route. And I'm going to push the layout page. All right, if we go to this, it looks the same. I think it should still be responsive just like the previous one, and it is. But we're going to do it a different way. So let's remove the media query that we used. And what we're going to do instead is wrap this big display in a widget called Layout Builder. Now, when we use a Layout Builder, we get this constraints property. And when we take the constraints, we can check the max width. If the max width is greater than 500, so we want to make sure this is an if statement, we can return big display. Otherwise, return small display. So this should do the exact same thing that we did before, just using a different method. There we go. It works the same way. So why would you use one versus the other? Well, you actually can use either of them. It doesn't really matter too much, but what I choose is to use media query for maybe one-off things that you won't use everywhere. And I'd use the layout builder for complete full-page layout alignments. You can wrap the whole page in this layout builder and have it display just as you want for the complete page. And maybe for media query, if I want a button to show up there or not, just one thing, I'd use media query. Also, the constraints do give you more information, so you could make it more perfect and aligned to just how you want it. But that's how you build responsive layouts. There's two methods using Layout Builder and Media Query, and they allow you to build your website to interact properly on all the screens.